here I am with access to the Salzburg Festival, the Glyndebourne Festival, the ear of this power structure. You know, this phenomenal level of support compared to Mozart, compared to Molière, finally. You know, I mean, we all have our moment where the door opens and you step in and you do anything you can do before they figure out what you're doing and throw you out again.
Right now, we're in a world where lots of people are trying to go backwards, and where classical music gets used by some of those people as their hiding place. You know, Mozart was not soothing music. Look at Mozart's reviews. In his time, Mozart was considered actually dangerous, too intellectual, dissonant, annoying, hard to listen to, too loud, and really aggressive. His three big operas, Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte, were considered offensive, lewd, and politically subversive.
Vidi pesi con la bocca e più col cor. Alla fate tante, 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 tante. E un pizzietto seccator, e un pizzietto seccator. Siete paghi, siete amabili, tu tesori il ciel vi vie, e le grazie vi circondano, dalla testa sino ai piedi. Dalla testa fino ai piedi, ma la parte tante, 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 tanti. E se gridano gli amanti, fanno certo un gran perché. Perché un certo un gran perché.
I mean, I would say it takes courage, except that I'm not fighting in Bosnia right now, and that must take much more courage. You know, I am not starving to death in Somalia right now. You know, and that must take a whole other type of courage. In fact, the courage in this world is awesome. And those of us in the arts have barely touched it. And the very least we can do is honor those individuals whose lives have been sufficiently difficult that they're teaching all the rest of us a lesson in life. So I think it's one's obligation, and one really isn't given a choice, you know, if you take up this field, because otherwise you are shamed and you will burn in hellfire.
Look.
Your family was hurt? Your father was hurt?
Yes.
Tell me, what happened to your father?
His leg broken, and his hand, and all face. No
up?
face. No.
His
Lips and nose, everything. His eyes.
From the fire?
From the fire and the...
Doctor, are these the bodies of that family? The two women that are lying there? This is what's left of her family, that's it?
Yes, yes.
The Gulf War, for example, was a fabulous video game, a display of exciting new technology. And the actual atrocity of war itself could not be called into question, and therefore was kept off camera. Well, I have a problem with that. I think people should know what's actually happening. I think not to know what's happening is the crime, and to cover up what's happening is the crime. And to expose what's happening is essential if we're to have an open debate within a supposedly open society about our public policy decisions. And the idea that in America there is not enough money for textbooks in the third grade classroom 5 blocks from my house, where there are 50 kids in one classroom, there are not enough desks, and half the kids are sitting on the floor. And because there are not enough textbooks, they can't take the books home with them to do their homework. They have to leave the books in the school. And yet, $30 billion was found to bombard the most industrially advanced Arab nation back to the Stone Age. Is an offensive reality to me.
T-80s, vicinity EA6. I have no losses.
Roger, Outlaw 6-1, 35 T-80s. Good job. You're clear to climb. We'll meet you at FAAM.
And that took place without a discussion. Without a discussion of consequences, options, or even relative merits and demerits. It's shocking to me. And that happens in the land of the free to protect oil interests and so that we can remain unquestioned as the world's policeman and to demonstrate that we can never be challenged. Is the recipe for the fall of a great nation.
The people are the heroes now, the hero rules the presence now. When we woke up, the fields are bright, the fields are bright with harvest in the morning light.
So the arts have to find a way to make themselves directly useful. They enter people's lives in such a way that people are happy to pay for them, that they're happy to say, this is of value to me and my community. This is actually telling my story. And my story wasn't being told on television. It wasn't being told on the front page of the New York Times. This is a way I can get my story out.
News as a kind of mystery, as a kind of mystery. When I shook hands, Joe and I, when I shook hands, Joe and I, on this bare field outside meeting, just now the whole world was listening. The whole world was listening, listening. And though we spoke quietly, and though we spoke quietly, and though we spoke quietly, the eyes and ears of history caught every gesture, it caught every gesture.
But most opera companies present a definition of culture that is elitist, retrospective, and actually deeply entrenched against the forward motion of history.
We came in peace for all mankind. I said, we came in peace for all mankind, and I was put in mind of our simply achieving a great human dream. We live in an unsettled time. We live in an unsettled time. Who are our enemies? Who are our friends?
We have been given this society at this moment, and we are using the culture that has been carefully created for us by our ancestors. But the only way we can honor it is to use it in the manner in which they wanted it to be used, in the service of addressing our contemporaries as contemporaries, in the service, well, as a service. You know, that we're not creating culture for our own vanity or for the vanity of a self-appointed group of nabobs who have decided that they will be guardians of, you know, of what is great and beautiful. Of course, we're working in a tradition where we have the works of Sophocles, the works of Shakespeare, the works of Molière, the medieval mystery plays, where we're actually called upon to have that level of courage. You can't do these plays without a certain willingness to confront the society. Molière's last plays had to be printed in Amsterdam and were illegal to have printed in France. And, you know, of course, Aeschylus and Euripides ended their lives in exile. And, of course, Mozart was finally just strangled to death. Theater has this kind of deeper function within a society of creating a space in which the undiscussable was discussed. Questions of justice, for example, are at the center of every Greek tragedy. And the audience is tested, and is testing the protagonists for their moral authority. And we're trying to say, well, excuse me, in a very complex question here, what is the difference between right and wrong?
Wait, I have to put up my eyelashes, sorry.
That's what feels comfortable about Salzburg. That's what feels useful.
It's a long flight. Just look like I'm going back to Africa. 4 flights.
The Salzburg Festival was founded as an avant-garde enterprise by working artists. To that extent, I don't need to tear this place down, I need to use it. I need to take what is usable here, which is that there is a tradition of art making at an extremely high level of visibility, extremely high level of accomplishment, and real aspiration. So, for example, it was very important to me to stage Mozart operas on the street, to actually present Mozart operas as grassroots political actions, as not something that is happening in a foreign time and place, in an elite world where people breathe different air than the rest of us breathe, and something that is enshrined in the past.
Ben carabino talla la testa, una protesta fa pedar. Se trovi piazza qualche ragazza, te corro quella cerca minar. Te corro quella cerca minar, cerca minar, cerca minar. Senza colore nella mia sfida, il minuetto, chi la follia, chi la balla, fa la ballar. Il minuetto, fa la ballar, chi la follia, fa la ballar, chi la donna, fa la ballar. Entri soltanto dall'altro canto, con questa quella vuoi mareggiar, vuoi mareggiar, vuoi mareggiar.
A lot of people don't really get Peter Sellars, you know. I mean, when I tell people I'm doing a show with Peter, the first image that they have of him is that he's a nut. You know? Oh my God, you're working with that crazy man? And, you know, I have to, I say, well, no, well, okay, he is a nut sometimes, but he's also one of the most caring, generous, smartest men you'll ever meet. And working with him, has been amazing because he has been able to somehow stretch me in ways that I've never been stretched before.
Salzburg is a symbol of power. Power and wealth have always gravitated here. And therefore, you have in the audience heads of state and industrial barons and people who are the power structure and who are the decision makers again and again. So you have an audience that's extremely interesting to address. And in the Salzburg Festival context, everybody talks. I mean, what's so great about this place is, you know, you do something and everybody's talking about it the next morning. And that's fabulous for me because, of course, that's what we're trying to do in this society is get people talking. You know, so if you can give them something to talk about that has real content and real subject matter, well, then we're finally getting somewhere.
You know, Peter wants us to go over this 400 times.
400, so here's number one.
Stay tuned because if we don't do it in the first 300, you have another 100 to look forward to.
For we have
gone against the entire world, ready to sweep free the sea.
In the Persians, for example, you have Aeschylus attempting something remarkable.
Can we keep going? Or do you have to breathe there?
I don't have to breathe, but it seems like the logical break. All Asia drawn together, a powerful bowstring.
He fought in the Persian War.
Yeah, but
The Persian War was a major encounter between the Greek and Persian forces in which the Greeks triumphantly won the war.
Strung and pointed at the heart of Europe, for once more they have injured us, but this time we shall destroy them. Let's just do...
The Greeks, so we've been told, represented freedom, the Persians represented slavery, and the Greeks amazingly slaughtered the Persians. More than a decade later, Aeschylus then presented the story of the Persian War to an audience at one of the Greek festivals. 20,000 Athenian citizens sitting on the side of a hill, one of these great amphitheaters, a giant ear carved into the side of a mountain. And he told the story of the Persian War from the Persian point of view. They had families. They thought they were right. They had a civilization. In short, they were human beings.
Then I dropped it.
This idea of humanizing the enemy is, of course, what drama was invented to do.
What I want to do is just get this scene moving quickly.
We have made a version of it that deals with the Gulf War and tries to handle some of the material that was not on television. For example, Iraqis, who were largely absent from your screen, dead or alive, even though 300,000 of them were killed. We've tried to deal with some of this material through the lens of the ancient play, but the new play that we've made, written by Robert Oletta, a New York playwright, is not just about the Gulf War any more than it's just about the Persian War, because Aeschylus, of course, is trying to address larger moral questions.
Long-term effect is as
We're dealing with two Latinos, an Indonesian, an African-American, a deaf actor, and a Palestinian-American. You know, you're dealing with people with the souls to tell the story of what it is to be on the outside looking in, of what it is to be the other.
Another day in the desert, Saudi Arabian desert tanker style.
The challenges are nothing new. The tank commander, Second Lieutenant Chris Hampton, says to keep a tank running in the desert takes teamwork.
Let's go kick his butt.
And we're all keeping the ball in the court, keeping our minds on what we need to do, and getting the job done. The crew is like a basketball team, except we don't have 5 guys. We've got 4 guys in a tank.
Klinghoffer was an opera that will have a life 50 and 100 and 200 years from now because it dared to take a longer view and it dared to ask the type of moral questions that Greek tragedy asks. Klinghoffer was about trying to make a space for real contemplation of issues between Israel and the PLO that are more emotionally responded to than thought about. I mean, the Arab issue is, you know, if not the most burning issue in global politics, you know, in the top 3. You know, every human being knows of this issue, suffers over it,
thinks over it deeply. It's impossible to be in the world today and not be affected by it and not constantly have it in the back of your mind as something uncomfortable.
I heard that there had been some talk at one point, but only talk about whether or not you wanted to go ahead with the opera at this time because of the Persian Gulf War. Could you discuss that? If that isn't true?
It is for the audience to draw their own conclusions about what we put on stage. And we put this on stage as a way to launch a discussion, not as a way to end one.
But is it confrontational, given the psyche of the American public
Well,
right now?
I think at a certain level, one cannot be in the presence of this subject matter for 3 hours without, after a while, confronting at some level one's own thoughts.
The Arab world has been presented to Americans as a bizarre, mercurial, incomprehensible culture. Now, that doesn't mean that I wanted to paint them as aliens, but I wanted at certain points in the opera to give the feeling of otherness that must have been experienced by the hostages. I mean, I don't think that opera in the 20th century has the kind of cultural impact that it had in the 18th and certainly in the 19th century. But if they really address really meaningful issues that affect our lives directly now, the form itself can perhaps regain the power and the cultural influence that it had 100 years ago.
Well, a number of large opera companies really retreated from its presentation. And, you know, you had a situation where, you know, it was too politically risky, or the work itself didn't seem to have enough pizzazz to quite justify. You know, it wasn't a sensation at all. In fact, it was a very kind of quiet, serious, intense piece. And so people, you know, thought, well, maybe we can't present that. And so just very quietly, it was withdrawn from the seasons of a number of important opera companies. Now, our hope is that, you know, history is moving forward, and we will see it now return. But as always, in any society, you know, it's a negotiation. I mean, Mozart's Don Giovanni was also withdrawn after a few performances in Vienna and not shown again there in his lifetime. I mean, I think, you know, one has to understand whenever one is treating certain subject matter that, of course, it will be called into question and in some way or another censored, or if that's too strong a word, politely declined. We have to engage at two levels, always in our life, constantly, to make democracy function. We have to be working at the grassroots, street level, but we also have to be working at the level of the major institutions, because it is the major institutions that are defining the identity of this nation. And we have to constantly engage at the top level. So if it's the Music Center, if it's the County Museum of Art, or the Museum of Contemporary Art, if it's the Philharmonic, if it's the Opera Company, these are major institutions paid for by tax dollars, and they have to represent the social, economic, political, and cultural realities of the emerging nation. But right now, for example, our response to the crisis of our inner cities is to hire 3,000 more cops here in Los Angeles. The biggest growth industry in California is building new prisons. You know, huge amounts of money, in a time when we have no money, are being committed to huge negative solutions. We are willing to pay $200,000 to apprehend and incarcerate an 18-year-old black male for 10 years.
Stone cold, stone dead, unrecognizable among the recognizable dead. I hack them to pieces. They'll never have another chance to left to be behind my back and take what's rightfully mine. When I get them back to the base, I'll feed them to my pet wolfhound.
I'm not in favor of the age of the director. I'm not interested in the absurd obsession with the executive branch.
What is this dinky, horrible little light doing here? Oh my God, Beth, this is an open insult. Do you know how important we are? Do you know how important we are? What is this?
Which is why I never went to theater school. I deliberately went to Harvard where there was no theater department, so that I just did 40 shows when I was in high school and 40 shows when I was in college, and I just did them for whoever would come see them.
I take this as a professional insult.
And I did puppet shows for 10 years. I had my own little puppet company, and I probably have performed more in shopping malls than anywhere else in my life.
And we're going to get dead ones, right? No more of these live flowers. It looks like a, a train wreck in a florist shop.
For many years, I did, 6 shows a day with my little company of friends. So you learn very quickly how to communicate with an audience.
Could we please go back and start at? Sean, where do you want to start?
I worked without the mediation of critics or, the press or anything else. Frankly, you're there on the street and people either walk by or they stop and look. And they stop and look for 5 minutes or they stay for the whole show. And they leave immediately after the show or they put something in the hat. And so those were the, those were the gradations of success. And if they put something in the hat, then you had dinner that night. So I mean, it's a basic, my attitude towards theater is actually pretty primitive in that regard. And Roger Stevens at the Kennedy Center was looking around for somebody to energize that place. Roger was a man of 75, and I was a man of 25. He said, you're going to have to learn to drive this sooner or later, so here are the keys to the car. And asked me if I wanted to work at the Kennedy Center. So I set in with an extremely ambitious and idealistic program during Ronald Reagan's second term. We did 18 productions in 2 years, which included Chekhov's Seagull or The Count of Monte Cristo and the version that O'Neill's father played. And finally Ajax by Sophocles, which was the production that really ended my relationship with the Kennedy Center. We were across the Potomac from the Pentagon, and the set for that show was the loading dock of the Pentagon where they take the garbage out, and that's where we had Athena's court. And so there was this model of the Pentagon on stage, and all the 4-star generals were played by huge black actors, and this was in the pre-Colin Powell days. And Washington genuinely thought I'd lost my marbles. I mean, the Washington Post was a bit shocked, and they said, Sellars has really lost it. How dare he sling this at us?
Sir, you have my deep admiration for all you've been through, but now we have to deal with some serious considerations. An army, like a city, like a country, runs on discipline, order, respect. But an army even more so because of its volatile nature. Ajax ignored these principles time after time. He served himself, his own needs, and he ignored the consequences. How many times had he been warned? He feared neither authority, nor right, nor power, nor the censure of his fellow officers. An army in a country cannot function unless there's a sufficient amount of fear buried inside each citizen. We ignore this dictum at our peril. Fear teaches us to be humble, to be modest, to be respectful. It teaches us to put our pleasures behind us and to serve the greater good. The greatest men must learn humility.
There were days when there were 19 people in the theater in a 500-seat house, and it was a bit depressing. And the question was, should I stay in Washington? And meanwhile, I had offers to work all over the world, and I was saying no to everything because I was trying to keep this Washington project afloat. And finally, one says, well, is it absolutely necessary to stay where you were least wanted? Or should you actually finally go where you are wanted and do some work there for people who are interested in seeing it? In my productions, I try and create something which relates directly to one's day-to-day experience, because obviously what we're all trying to figure out is what kind of world we're trying to create now.
Great artists are not just good composers, they're wise people. And that's really why we bother with any of this stuff. Why we revive it is not because we're particularly interested in Baroque music, but that actually what is in a Handel opera is wise. And what we're really hunting for is not just entertainment, but wisdom. And a way in which that wisdom still speaks to our generation. So that the voices of ancestors are speaking to us, is that somehow you realize that in your own life, your ancestors are whispering to you and trying to send you a message. The Persians, for example, is the first surviving manuscript in the history of Western drama. It's the first complete play that we have.
Yes, rest. Just give me the claps. Give me the clap.
You want the claps too?
Yeah, rest, clap. I did.
The Greek chorus is handled by two individuals, Ben Halley Jr. He brings basically the power of the black church. And Joe Hodge is a young Palestinian actor from Los Angeles who brings his own particular set of convictions to this play. The Messenger is performed by Martinez Miroto, one of the star performers of the Royal Court of Java. He performs with masks, and the entire role of the Messenger is danced with the chorus taking the lines in the manner that we know that Greek tragedy was sung and danced.
And the women being turned into prostitutes? Let's kill that. Cordelia's agent doesn't want it.
Complementing Miroto in the role of the ghost of King Darius, a brilliant actor named Howie Seago. He is a deaf performer. He does not hear, and he does not speak. Again, communicates exclusively in gesture.
Where are the children?
Look, this little boy over here with his legs blown off. He looks like me at his age. His eyes. Maybe it is me. The child Darius with his legs blown off. The children will be shown no mercy. 500 children a day marked for death. 500 children a day to be obliterated.
Aeschylus wrote a play not to just provoke people's conscience about the Persians and the defeated enemy, but also to deal with the deeper level in which your enemy is yourself, which is the question that Western nations now have to ask themselves. What is the level of internal catastrophe that we're facing? Aeschylus's play is part documentary eyewitness account and part pure fabrication, part a genuine attempt to imagine life in the Persian court, which of course Aeschylus could never have known or seen.
But what does it mean that you don't know? And then what changes when you do know? And how much do you really know? How much do you just not notice what you already know? And then when does that knowledge take the next step to become the type of understanding that motivates action? How much are we spectators in our own lives? And how much are we central, active beings? And do we realize that this is not someone else's story? This is our story. And we better get to work now to try and rewrite the fourth act. Because the fifth act is not looking very attractive.
We send children on our crusades. We bring children, our countries, right or wrong, then we retire. Fathers and sons, let us join hands. Let us join hands. Let us join hands. Make peace for once. Fathers and sons, let us join hands. Let us join hands. Let us join hands, make peace for once. History's our mother, we best do her honor this way.
I think this is what an artist is here to do, to be listening, to be looking at the things that people basically are seeing every day but ignoring. You know, that people do know but don't want to particularly stop and deal with. You know, and the artist is the person in the society who's being paid to stop and try and deal with it. And to create a climate in which more people would have occasion to stop. So this is one of the reasons why, obviously, in the history of art, shock tactics are used. Because you do want to, at a certain moment, get people's attention. Stop them dead in their tracks. Say, oh, wait a minute. Turn the tables. Say everything you thought obtained doesn't obtain. Oh my God, what does that mean? You know, and in some way create something that focuses attention. And from there a discussion begins. You know, I'm not interested in shock tactics per se. I couldn't care less. I'm not trying to get attention for myself. I'm trying to send up a flag, some type of warning signal about subject matter which I consider to be of urgent importance. For example, the kind of vast arrogance and presumption of the Western nations of saying, well, in the Orient there's simply not the value of a human life. People don't value human life the same way, and we, with our fabulous tradition and civilization of humanism, we value a human life. So we can bomb the capital of another nation when we feel like it, killing innocent people living in the suburbs. And they're just collateral damage. We don't even speak of them as people who've been killed. Even that the word casualty was invented. I'm sorry, there's nothing casual about dying.